Hey guys, welcome to the Enyo fitting video. Now, this is for the Rail Faction Warfare Enyo, and this ship is really powerful for faction warfare because everyone assumes that an Enyo is a blaster boat. So that's the first most important thing about this ship is misdirection. So like a magician, we're going to make everybody believe that it's a blaster boat, a brawler, comes in close to fight, when in reality it's a kite that stays at a range and does some serious damage. There is a big downside to this ship, and that is the capacitor, but we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Let's go over briefly the fittings and the idea behind this fit. So basically, just set it up about, I don't know, quite a while ago, I was getting kind of irritated with faction warfare because it was hard to have a ship that could perform consistently well in faction warfare because the PvP styles there are so tricky, with some people flying scram kites, that is, kites that stay within the 9-10k scram range, usually at about 7k, maybe 8k, and then kite you from that range. But then there's also the full-on kites like the Condor and several others that would go out in a slicer, which is seen a lot in Imperial Navy slicer. They go out at about 15 to 18k, maybe up to 20. And those ships kite at even further range. So one solution is to counter the scram kites, but then you leave yourself open to the kites. Or you counter the kites, but then you leave yourself open to the up-close brawlers. So you get into a situation where you're going to lose some of your fights no matter what. And that's really how it is no matter what. But in faction warfare, I was facing a situation where I was losing about half the time because I could never predict what I was going to fight ahead of time except when I chose the fight. And even then, you didn't know how the person was fit because the fittings vary so much in faction warfare. So I decided probably the only all-inclusive counter would be something that can do good DPS from range and can beat all the other kites. So Imperial Navy Slicer, which is one of the kings of the kiting, it can just completely tear it down. So let's look at actually a slicer, if I can find one. Pull up one of my old fits. Alright, so I'll put that there. So the Imperial Navy Slicer, you can see here, this is one of my fits. I've also got a fit I stole from Anderson Williams. That's got an AAR. And I think this is my main fit right here, Kite. Alright, so Kite's my main fit. There you go. Small focused pulse laser 2s, scorch loaded. Your optimal is 18k, your speed is 3,553, and you're relatively cap stable. You're not cap stable, but it's not that bad. 2 minutes is usually, I consider anything over 2 minutes to be viable for a long drawn out fight. Because like, if you look at the SFI and SFI Pro Guide, it's just over 2 minutes. Ideally, you're not running everything for 2 minutes straight at any one given time. You want to make your fights quick skirmishes. So in this case, you can see that the slicer's going to be doing 147 DPS at that 18k. You're going to be doing 222, right? He's got 4,400 hit points. You've got 7,000. So you see how you win this fight very easily. The only advantage that slicer has over you is speed, agility, and his capacitor. So that's one of the ships that I basically built this ship, the Enyo, to counter. The Enyo is great at DPS because if you look at the bonuses here, 10% per level to damage, 10% to optimal range, 7.5% to tracking. So that tracking bonus helps with the rails quite a bit. You can track even up close. You can still track pretty well. Not that I think you should, although you'll see several videos where I'm forced to fight up close. The biggest challenge you're going to face in this ship is going to be maintaining range. You do not want to get webbed or scrammed. The reason I have this web here is to try to avoid a scram. So for example, if something is charging in on you, you overload your web and you hit them with it as they're approaching once they get within 13K. And if they don't get that scram on you, if they don't just coast into scram range, you're going to drop their speed to below what your speed is, even if they're like an interceptor. By doing so, you're able to stay outside web and scram range, which is really the danger in this ship. You've got an internal force field array damage control. That's to save CPU. CPU in this ship is really tight. You've got 2 mag stabs because we're trying to get that DPS as high as possible. That's the idea behind this ship. The theory behind the ship is we want really high DPS from a kite range. So we want to be able to hit people hard from a long range while maintaining a reasonable amount of effective hit points comparative to the other ships you find in faction warfare. And by that I mean you usually don't find assault frigates in faction warfare. Typically what you find is Tech 1 frigates and faction or Navy frigates, like you'll find the Fed Navy Comet, the Imperial Navy Slicer, the Republic Fleet Firetail. Those are all very common ships to find. You'll also see some pirate frigates like the Succubus, I think that's one, the Crewer, Dramiel. You'll see those in there. Anyways, so you've got high damage from your 2 mag stabs, your 150 railguns. 150 railguns, they are the biggest railguns for the frigate size. You've got a 20K point because you really don't need to go beyond 20K. Your fall off does go beyond 20K, but you really don't need to. And also that saves capacitor to go to a faint epsilon as opposed to the Tech 2. I don't think, I just want to see something here for my own information, which one uses more or less capacitor. And activation for the faint is 21, 23 over here, duration's 5 on both. So yeah, the faint is the best for capacitor, unless maybe you went to faction, and then you get too expensive. You're going to lose these, so you don't want them to be insanely expensive. They're already pretty expensive as far as assault frig goes. You've got your railguns, you've got your long point, you've got your web. One thing I was thinking of potentially, you don't have a whole lot of capacitor, so maybe you could drop this web for something that gives you capacitor to help solve that capacitor problem. But in general, I found this fit to be plenty because most of the fights that I came across in faction warfare would end within about 30 seconds. The high DPS output meant you could end the fight quickly. The only implant I had to make this work, well, I guess I didn't even need that one, did I? How about that? I'm not sure why I even had it there. But that's not giving us a very realistic view. I thought I would have had the implants already in there. So let's go ahead and add the implants ourselves. We don't need that one. We want small hybrid SH603 for sure. Got to get that DPS up. I'm also going to want the surgical strike. Surgical strike puts a damage bonus instead of a duration bonus. So damage means, that means it's going to not hurt your capacitor, even though it is fractional or marginal. So just a 1% there. You don't have to go expensive. You could go with a 3%. Small. And I think that's it for gunnery. Then we want to do passive tanking because there's nothing else you can put in slot 10. I usually go with an HG 1001 to get just a little bit more hit points. It's 7,319 and 292. So it's I don't know, 20 something. Not bad. Then mobility is important. You need some agility. So where is it? Evasive. Evasive maneuvering, that's going to help with your agility just slightly, not even enough to change it, but it will help some. You got 6, you got 7. All we need is a slot 8. I don't know of a slot 8 that's really that helpful. Maybe this. I didn't want to do that. Show info. Dang it, it's just Afterburner. If it was micro warp drive, it would probably be worth it to drop 1% of your energy consumption. Alright. So I'm not really sure what to put in slot 8. That's medium. How about a, there might be a capacitor. What slot is that? That's energy pulse weapons. Capacitor emissions. This would be the capacitor one, slot 6. Not helping. Which one's that now? Oh, there we go. Capacitor management. 1% to capacitor. I'll take it. Now you can go to 3% on these. I'm just going super cheap because I don't want everybody to have to spend a fortune. But you can see that changed our capacitor quite a bit. It was 55 seconds. And now, yeah, so it added a second. Not a lot, but I'll take what we can get. Another thing you could do to improve that capacitor, because the capacitor is going to be your problem, it's going to be what you run into a lot, is your capacitor. You could run with a booster, and is it Crash that does it? No, it's the other one. Drop, I think. No, Drop's tracking. One of these helps your capacitor. It's optimal. Must be in here. Mind Flood, that's it. Alright. So Mind Flood gives you a 3% more capacitor. And it's about 1 million probably for each one. And each one lasts an hour. So might as well. You could go with a stronger one, but then you risk side effects, and the side effects would almost certainly outweigh the benefit. So it's probably not the worth the risk of side effects. You can see here at the rigs I've got an overclocking 2 because, like I said, CPU is a big problem. But I'd say that's about as optimized as I can get this fit. And typically what I would do is I would sit inside a site because I want people to fall for the misdirection of me being a blaster boat and saying, oh, this is a blaster boat. I'm going to go in there with my slicer and I'm going to kite this guy. Or I'm going to go in there with my condor or 3 condors. And we'll take 3 condors and we'll just gang up on this dude. So I was kind of thinking about it like that and thinking that I want them to come at me. And what I would do is I would sit about 15 to 18K from the warp in inside the small sites. And then I would just sit there and wait. And as soon as they came in, I would orbit or keep at. Keep at tracks better, but orbit maintains your distance better and prevents you from getting bounced into scram range. So I would say that it's better to start with an orbit at the beginning of the fight, which you'll see me make this mistake when I die several times. Start with the orbit instead of the keep at. The keep at could potentially, even for a moment, send your ship towards his ship, which means it's going to take your ship several seconds to turn around and get back up to speed going in the opposite direction of him, and therefore it's going to get caught and scrammed and webbed much more far more times. So let's duplicate this setup. I just want to look at one more thing. So we're going to duplicate it, and I'm going to change one thing. I'm going to drop that, and in its place I am going to add not a cap battery. I've never really used those. Small capacitor booster 2. And guess what? I don't think you would ever need the 400. It would basically over cap you because 400 capacitor, you only got 335. I would think that 200s would be just fine. And there you go. So now you've got all the cap you want, but you have no way to back people off. So is the trade-off worth it? You're going to have to just tell by experience. Personally, I say no. It's not worth it because, yes, if your speed is already enough for you to maintain your range and you can kill them before your capacitor runs out, or no, I got that mixed up. So for this one here, for the one with the cap booster, if your speed is enough to maintain your range non-stop, just by running your micro warp drive non-stop, then yes, this works. But as you can see here against the slicer, you're not the fastest ship on the grid. You're absolutely not. There's going to be many things out there faster than you that are going to want to try to scram you. For example, when you see me fight the Dramiel, it's going to be next to impossible for you to keep range on a Dramiel with a micro warp drive. The only way you're going to have to get good tracking on him once he gets in close is with the web. So that fit, pretty much a special circumstances only fit. This is going to be more of an overall fit. But there is one more thing you can do to this fit to make it more cap stable, which is what I did with this one. So the difference, I'm just going to delete this fit. Alright, we don't care about that one. The difference here is, if you look, I'm just going to change back and forth. I basically switched out a magnetic field stabilizer for a capacitor power relay. And you can see that the effects it has are that, one, I can fit a damage control 2, therefore increasing my hit points by about 200. And 2, let's look at the capacitor now as I change. So from 58 to 1 minute 6. And this guy here doesn't have all of the same implants. That's not the best implant right there. That's the rapid fire, which rapid fire is okay, but surgical strike's better because it's going to give you, it's not going to affect your capacitor. So let's switch that to surgical strike, and then let's give him the same implants. You know, let's do this. Let's do it like this. I want to be able to see both these fits at the same time, so let's make a duplicate. And let's pull it up over here. So now we're looking at both at the same time. I'm actually going to switch these out so it's easier for me to see this. Alright. So we've got those two implants in. Let's see. Let's do the passive tanking, give him the HG. I'm not sure if it's the 1 or the 3% that I usually get. I think it's the 1%. It's the 803 for your structure. I think that I usually get the 3 for because it's really cheap. All right, what else do we need? We need 7 and 8 for 8. Let's do the same one we did over here. Kind of bringing you guys in with my thinking process. Seeing this capacitor go up just a little bit. And then what else do we need? 7. For 7 we want that extra bit of agility. So we want the evasive maneuvering. Again, it doesn't make any noticeable difference here, but it does make a difference. It has to. So, all good. Wait, there's one more thing. Let's give him the drug as well. Mind flood. Minute 14. Okay, so now if you compare the two, minute 14 versus 58 seconds, most of the time you're not going to have your web running. You're going to have it primed to be overloaded, so this is more accurate right here. Minute 27 versus minute 5. So it's an extra 22 seconds you're getting by having this capacitor power relay. But the cost is that you're getting a drop in DPS by 42 DPS, which is very, very big. I'm going to see what happens when I raise this ammo up. You can change your range by changing your ammo. So especially with antimatter, with, say, projectile, it's not quite the same. There's more to it, but it's really easy to configure your range based on ammo with the hybrid turrets. So right now we're using uranium. Let's try plutonium. Yeah, I don't know why I had uranium in there. And this has a warp disruptor too as well. I think I was trying to go out further, but I don't think that's the best way to go with this. Alright, so now you can see that I've switched that to the faint warp disruptor instead of the Tech 2. We've gained even more capacitor. That's a very big difference. That's pretty huge. Our DPS difference is not as big as it was before I changed the ammo, but it's still pretty serious. I usually would orbit in this ship at about 17k is what I would set my orbit to, because you're going to drift out of that and you want to try to never go beyond 20. So I would set it at 17, and if I saw I was having trouble keeping a point on them, I would shorten it into 15. Let's see. Alright, so that's 35 DPS difference. Range is the same. Only thing that changed was the mag stab, the damage control. So you get a little bit more hit points, you get considerably better capacitor, and you lose some DPS. So this, I'm going to leave this up to you. I don't know which one of these fits is better. It really depends on how you fly your ship and how fast you kill your opponent and what you're fighting. You'll see in the video, in one of the combat videos, I take on an armor buffer wolf, and while I have no trouble really winning the fight, my trouble is I don't have enough capacitor to stay in the fight long enough to wear through his buffer. In that case, this ship would have been much better. I could have, pulsed my micro warp drive here and there to try to maintain a little bit better cap. You don't have to run it all the time. If you see that your opponent has given up chasing and he's stopped his micro warp drive, then as long as you watch it and you're very careful, you can stop yours as well in most cases. So those are the fits. Those are the two fits I recommend right there. The capacitor fit, that's going to be a lot easier on your capacitor. It's also going to be easier to fit. It doesn't push these lines as much. You see over here it's 233 of 233.58. That's basically all level 5 skills. So the only thing that changes between Abaddon and all level 5 is the power grid. But the CPU does not change. So you've got to have level 5 skills when it comes to all the CPU things that affect CPU. And I don't really know what all of those are off the top of my head beyond the basics. I believe there's one that affects the gun CPU, how much CPU it takes, stuff like that. So this is going to be hard to fit, this fit here, the regular high DPS fit. It's also going to run out of capacitor pretty quick. So you're going to be sitting there with everything off inside the sight. And when you see something on short scan, I'll talk about that in a tactics video. I'm going to do a real quick tactics video to describe the tactics of this ship. It's the same as pretty much any other faction warfare ship. But when you see something come on scan, then you're going to prime your web to be overloaded. Not turn it on, just prime it. It should always be primed, really. And you're going to go ahead and turn on your micro warp drive. Prime your guns to be overloaded, because in this ship especially the high damage ship, you want to overload your guns, because they're going to overload for a minute and your capacitor is only going to last for a minute. You might as well be doing as much DPS as you can during that minute. Your capacitor is going to last for considerably less if you have to use your web. So one thing you can do to make the guns last longer is leave an empty slot in between them. And you can see now we got a minute 5 seconds as compared to a minute 1. So it adds 4 seconds on average. That's not definite. There's some random variation. So in this case, in both cases, you want to start overloaded. Both cases. So that's how you're going to fight basically through the fight. And you're only going to use your web in the case that they're catching you, or they're getting too close, or maybe there's more than one and one gets too close, and so you pulse one cycle of the web overloaded at 13 kilometers, and that'll back them off so long as they're not moving at such a velocity that they just coast right up in and get that scram, and they're smart enough to be overloading their point. If they're smart enough to be overloading their point, then they're probably going to get you. But most people aren't. Most people are too focused on everything else to get the tackle and to pull off the execution. So those are the two fits, and the basic ships that I think they'd be good for killing are the Slicer, the Condor, the Breacher, the types of ships that you see in faction warfare all the time that are very, very common. And because you never see Enyos in faction warfare, and because anyone who's flown an Enyo knows it to be a blaster boat. So let me show you an example. Here's a shield Enyo fit that I did for my alliance a long time ago. We no longer use these, but it was a shield fleet meant to be paired with scythe or multiple scythes. So we'd have cruiser logistics for our Enyo assault frigates. There was also, we had the Harpy and the, what else do we have? We had the Jag, several other assault frigates. So it's all assault frigates with scythe logi, and they were pretty unstoppable, pretty awesome. We used them in the Brave War to great success. Anyways, so it's higher DPS like this, but you see your range is massively limited. Beyond 5 kilometers, you're basically trash. Whereas our fit goes out beyond 20k and does some very significant DPS. Certainly when it comes to this slicer here, if you're doing 269 DPS, then you're going to tear through this guy in about 30 to 45 seconds. So he's going to die probably in about 35 seconds, I would say. You're going to kill that slicer. Now if it was old Anderson Williams, he has that AAR to try to keep him alive. The problem is, as soon as he runs that AAR, he's going to get a cycle or two, and then he's cap dead. And then he's not shooting anymore. And he's struggling to run anything, which is why I didn't use that fit. That fit works very well for a short burst. You can't ever run that AAR for more than like one cycle. It's just like a short burst, and then you have to turn it off. And even then, if you look here, your cap's not that great. So I would recommend, if you did use the slicer, which I'm not really, that's not what this video is about, this fit. No tank, just basically your entire setup relies on being able to survive by maintaining range. Same as our Enyo. People come in, they think it's a blaster ship, and that's a big mistake, and they get absolutely annihilated by this pretty awesome kite. And keep in mind, it's not just these faction warfare ships you can kill. You could take this ship into nullsec and get yourself tackled by an interceptor. Oh man, you get yourself tackled by an interceptor, and that interceptor is going to have a very, very bad day. So that's it for the fitting video. I'm going to go in and make the tactics video now and get a little bit more into the tactics. Watch the tactics video, get the fit, and then that's really all you need. But you can watch some of the fight videos as well to really understand the ship and start having some fun. Hey guys, I wanted to talk briefly about the tactics for the Enyo. This is for the rail faction warfare Enyo. And it doesn't have to be limited to faction warfare. Like I say in the fitting video, you can use it against interceptors and other kitey ships out in nullsec. Like let's say the enemy has an interceptor at a gate nearby your home station or something, and you want to mess with him, so you just pretend to be trying to get through with a Enyo, and when he tackles you, you just shred him. So there's different examples where this is going to be useful. Right here I have a picture, screenshot of a acceleration gate. And the reason for this is because it's like faction warfare. You warp into the site, there's an acceleration gate. It doesn't look exactly like this, but pretty similar. So when you come to the site, what you want to always do before you warp to the site, before you ever warp to the site, is use your directional scanner to narrow it down to 30 degrees, 15 degrees, whatever it may be. And once you have it narrowed down, you need to make sure of what's in the site. If there's already a ship in the site, then you have to assume, it's not always the case, but you have to assume that that ship's going to be either at 0 on the gate. This thing's irritating. At 0 on the gate here, or at 0 on the entrance of the site. So they're either going to be waiting for you here or there. Either way, you're potentially going to land at 0 in a ship that should not ever be webbed or scrammed and then you're dead. So if you get webbed or scrammed, your chances of winning the fight go down dramatically. You want to always maintain that range with, say, a 16 to 17K setting on your orbit, and then maybe a 17K keep at, should you decide to go to the keep at instead of the orbit. My advice is to go to orbit first, and then only if you see you're struggling with DPS because of tracking, then you go to the keep at, which will help minimize your tracking and help you to track the target better. So you never want to be scrammed or webbed. Therefore, you never want to go to a site where there's already people in it unless you're fairly confident that you can defeat those people close or at long range, or unless you're fairly certain that the people that are in the site, or whatever ship or ships are in the site, are going to kite you. So one example of that would be if I scanned this from range, from the planet or something, and I saw, okay, there's a Navy Slicer, or a Condor, or what's another one? The Imachus, I think, and the Breacher are also kites for faction warfare. If I saw those, then I would be fairly confident going to the site. And I'd warp to the gate at 0, go in, engage. Another possible occurrence would be if you see multiple ships in the site, or maybe you see 5, 10 ships in the site. Well, then maybe there's a fight happening inside that's already in progress. Oftentimes when there's multiple parties in a fight, people will trickle in. So one good thing about this gate is it allows for different kinds of isolations and different kinds of limitations that you can put on your opponents. So for one is people cannot warp from inside the site back to the entrance. Can't do it. They would have to first warp over here to this planet and then bounce off the planet back to the site. To do that, it's going to take them 30 seconds, 45 seconds, I don't know. But one way or another, it's going to slow them down. So if you fight on the entrance and not inside, while there's a fight on the inside, then you can isolate your targets. So what I would often do if I saw there was a fight is I would come in at probably 50 kilometers. There's my awesome mouse handwriting. 50 kilometers to the gate. Warp at 50. And I'd check to see if anyone's there. If no one was there, then I would come and sit right next to the gate. And I would wait. And I'd keep my directional scanner going. For faction warfare, your directional scanner is of the supreme importance. It is massively important that you're constantly watching it and that you drop it down to 1 AU or even smaller. But 1 AU is usually fine for most sites. Sometimes you have to go smaller than that to 100,000 kilometers or something like that. So 1 AU scan range on your directional, spamming it nonstop. What you might see is the ship is forced to run away, like we did in this example, and he's forced to run away to the planet because he was low. Then he regenerates a little bit and he comes back to rejoin the fight, but now you're here waiting on him. And so now you're here and you initiate your kite and you just crush that guy. So there's a lot of ways to get other fights. Also, should reinforcements come, you're in an ideal position to kill the reinforcements as they're trying to get into the site. Now, if you see ships starting to disappear from your scan, then it's reasonable to believe that these guys over here are starting to leave to come bounce off something and come back to you. So you need to be constantly aware of that and constantly have your ship or have your screen oriented so that you're facing, say, a belt. That's a horrible triangle. Okay, a belt. I don't even know if they're triangles anymore with the new UI. A belt or a planet or the sun. I think it looks like this now, kind of. Not really. And you need to always have a warpable in your vision so that you can quickly warp out. And if things look bad, you align. If things look like they're really bad, you leave. You warp out. So let's get rid of some of this junk here. Control Z is your friend. Alright. So there goes all that. Now, that's what happens if you fight on the outside. But if you fight on the outside, any size ship can fight on the outside of any plex. So there's no reason why a Curse or a Hyperion, which would not be very useful, but any ship could land on this gate. A carrier even could come to the gate. So on the outside, you're at much greater risk of being blobbed or otherwise having an unfair fight than you are on the inside of the site. If you're on the inside of the site, what you want to do, let's say the site is empty, but it's a relatively busy system and you're pretty sure that people are going to look in the site and want to come fight. Now, like I said in the fitting video, you're in an Enyo. When everybody sees an Enyo, they immediately say, blaster Enyo. It's got to be a blaster Enyo. People don't fit rails on Enyos. It's a blaster Enyo. It's going to be a brawler. It's probably going to be sitting at 0, so as long as I land and quickly burn out of his range, I'll be okay. They're 100% sure that you're going to be a brawler. So they're fairly certain that they can come in and scram kite you or fully kite you out at 18, 20K. This misdirection means you're going to get more fights, and the fights that you get are going to be in your favor because those are exactly the types of fights you're looking for. You're looking for the people who think they can exploit your short range, because by thinking that, they are putting themselves right into your hands so you can crush them. So once you get into the site, it's empty. You've got your directional on 1AU. You're spamming your directional. I want you to move. Just hit your, you've got your, what's it called? HUD right here with your shields right there and your armor and your hull and your terrible drawing. And down here there's a little box of your velocity. And then right here there's arrows. Pretty sure, I'm just going by memory. You want to click those arrows to start your ship moving after you land. Pulse your micro warp drive 1 cycle. You'll see me do it in the videos. And move roughly 15 to 18K, depending on what your orbit's set at. Even up to 20K, because you're going to start with an orbit, not a keep at. And move your ship, let's just say 18. Trying to do this neatly. 18 kilometers from the warp in. So that they're going to come from here and they're going to land right here, and you're already going to be at your kite range. So even if they are a brawler, let's say that you're in the Enyo and somebody wants to have a good fight with you and they bring a wolf or a harpy, which would just annihilate a Enyo in most cases, like if you looked at my harpy videos. So they come in to brawl with you thinking you're a brawler, or they come in to kite with you like a slicer, condor, breacher, whatever. They come in to kite you. Doesn't matter. Once you see them show up on your directional, you know they're on the gate and they're coming, or they're probably coming, or they're sitting on the outside waiting and thinking about whether or not they can kill you. So then you get ready and you prime all your overloads, prime your guns to be overloaded, prime your web to be overloaded. Make sure your damage control is on. It should be on all the time. And you should have everything primed all the time, even when you're warping around system scanning, because you never know when a fight's going to happen. So you're ready. The moment you see him land, you turn on your micro warp drive. You start to orbit. You keep repeating that sequence, because when they're coming out of warp, they're invulnerable and a lot of your commands aren't going to take. So you want to be hitting orbit. Not keep at. You want to be hitting orbit, lock, micro warp drive, make sure it's on, be hitting orbit and lock, and just repeating those things until you see that those things have taken effect. Then as quickly as possible, you want to get your guns onto the target. Had to drink some water there. So you want to get your guns on the target and start your orbit around the target. I should make that like an eclipse, and I didn't really accomplish an eclipse, did I? Good enough. So you want to start your orbit at 17K, 18K. be cautious that you've got a 20k point on both of the fits, really. And therefore, if you go beyond 20k, you lose point, and they potentially can get away. So you want to start out with setting your orbit at about 17, 17.5, which will throw you out to 18-ish. And then if you see that that's throwing you out too far, you can always drop it down to 15. But I would not lower your orbit less than 15, because that could be exploitable by somebody trying to bounce you into scram range. Only if you see it's absolutely necessary. But then you start the fight, and you start just like you're going to see in the PvP videos. Just pay attention to your modules, pay attention to your capacitor. Don't use your micro warp drive more than you have to, because remember, your capacitor is weak. And get as much DPS on the target as fast as possible. First one to get DPS on has an advantage. Get it on as fast as possible, and do as much DPS as possible for the duration of the fight. You also want to be watching directional to make sure that scan's not filling up with new ships. If it is, then potentially there's a bunch of people on the way in to come blob you. And in that case, you find yourself in a line out, like a belt or the star. Let's try that one again. A little better, not much. And you automatically align, overload your micro warp drive, and then warp. Start spamming your warp button until you warp out. And whenever you land on whatever you land on, immediately turn around and warp to something else, because probably half the time, if the guy's any good, he'll see where you warp and he'll follow, and his buddies will follow shortly after that. So then we ask, okay, what happens if this scenario happens every time? Before you can kill the target, you get blobbed. Well, then we take a different tactic. And instead, let's get rid of some of this. Alright. Instead of 18 kilometers, I probably could use an eraser for this. No, I can't. Alright, so instead of 18 kilometers, you come into the site, and instead you go 100. Or 50. Or whatever. But it doesn't matter as long as you're far enough from the warp in to where people who do come into blob are going to then have to burn to you, which means that probably 100's a lot better than 50. So the whole idea here, the one thing about faction warfare that makes it interesting for PvP in general is not just the fact that it's got activity and you can get pretty regular fights. You're going to get more fights in faction warfare than nullsec, but in my opinion the nullsec fights are more enjoyable because it's more of a sandbox. There's less constraints. The constraints and the rules and the mechanics in the faction warfare site can work for you or against you. But those constraints help you to isolate your targets and to choose your targets. So if it's a small site, then you know that the biggest thing they can get in is a Tech 2. I think actually the Tech 3 destroyers can now get into the small sites. I'm not positive about that, but I'm pretty sure that, say, like the Hecates and Svaples and Confessor, all of them can get in to the Jackdaw also. Can get into the small sites. So in a small, you have the potential to be outgunned by something like a Svapul, which you're no match for. You should probably be no match for any of the T3 battlecruisers, not battlecruisers, destroyers. So one cool thing about this is I'm also going to include a Comet fit, and the Comet can get into the Novice sites. In the Novice sites, it's only Tech 1 and faction frigates. So the biggest thing you're going to face in a Comet is another faction frigate, or pirate frigate, or however you want to call it, but no Tech 2 frigates, no destroyers. So you can basically dictate the targets you're going to fight by the type of site you go to. And there's two types of fights. Like I said, you can go and you can hunt for sites that have people in them already, or you can go sit in a site. I do a combination of both when I'm doing faction warfare. I will usually set a long course through space, just traveling different systems, that are faction warfare low sec. And on the busier systems, I'll stop and I'll spend 5-10 minutes baiting in a site before I move on and stop in another busy system that has people in it and bait in that site. You don't want to stick around the same system too long, because then you start seeing the same people over and over, and then people start to catch on to your trick. So they're going to say, oh, well, this is, Viper, and Viper flies an Enyo, and there happens to be an Enyo. Viper's in local, and he flies a rail Enyo. So I know he flies that. I'm going to go in there with something that's going to counter him. So you don't want to do the same magic trick more than once to the same person, basically. So that's basically how you're going to get your fights. You're going to roam through low sec faction warfare space, one system after another, looking at the amount of kills in the system on the map, as well as the amount in dotland, as well as the amount of active pilots in the last 30 minutes to get an idea for which systems are going to be busy. And then you're going to stop along the way and bait in some of them. But no matter which ones you go to, you're always going to use your directional scanner to check out the sites and see what's in each system along the way. Now, like I was saying before about the isolation, so you've got the site. It only allows a certain amount of ships and a certain amount of ship types in. Therefore, you know that you're not going to be attacked by a curse or a rapier or a Deimos. You know that there's a limited amount of stuff that can kill you in the site, or that can come into the site. You can further increase that isolation by going out to 100K. I don't do this the majority of the time. It's not necessary, and it just ends up making the fight take longer. But if you want an extra margin of safety, you can go out to 100 kilometers, 70 kilometers, whatever, from the warp in on the inside of the site, and let them burn to you. Now, as they're burning to you, you can collect some intel about them. Things you're going to see as they're burning to you is you're going to see their ship speed, which is going to tell you how hard it's going to be for you to maintain your distance on them, and therefore dictate the tactics you use against them, which I'll talk about more in just a second. And you can also look at their ship and look and see what kinds of guns they have on their ship, because you should be familiar with what the different gun models look like. And that's something that's worth studying. You can look at the gun models inside EVE. You can pull up Light Neutron Blaster 2 and then look at the actual gun model and then look at a ship. And it's best to do that when you have a lot of time so you can not die in the process. But eventually you get to where you can just glance at it and say, that's a blaster. That's a real gun. And once you get that, it's a big edge to be able to do that. Now, before I was talking about seeing what their velocity is. Now, when you see what their velocity is, it gives you a lot of information just on that number, which is why I often fake my velocity. I will many times in a micro warp drive ship purposefully lower my velocity down to around 1,000 meters a second, on like a frigate, to try to make people believe that I'm an afterburner when I'm really a micro warp drive. There are cases when tricking people into believing that is beneficial. Not usually, but it happens. So the speed tells you a couple things. It tells you whether they're using a micro warp drive or an afterburner. If you see them coming at 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 even potentially, or something like a Dramiel, then you know they're in an afterburner fit. They're going to be easier to kite because of that, but they're also going to be much more deadly up close because of that. And then in that case, you may want to help them close some of that range by coming at an angle on them. You never want to approach directly. You want to come at an angle so that you can enter your orbit basically by spiraling in on them, because they'll be coming straight at you. They're going to be running straight at you, so you want to enter that orbit at an angle to avoid them getting the scram. And that just comes from practice on pulling that off, the execution. But it's basically start off playing it more safe, and then with a more of a wider spiral, slower approach, and then work your way into more aggressive spirals. Now, the other thing I said is, because of their speed, you can dictate your tactics. So let's do this. Let's say that the X is their ship, okay? They're right there. They are coming at you. And let's say that let's say that they are using a comet. That is not a very good comet. Okay. Now, let's also say that they're moving at 4,000. The ship for your Enyo, I'm going by memory, I believe that your velocity with your microwarp drive on is something like 2,400. That is no match for the Comet. The Comet is probably, if he's got a microwarp drive, he's probably blaster fit, and he's probably coming in to get right up on top of you. If he's doing this, then he would either be an idiot to charge a blaster Enyo, or he knows you're a rail Enyo. So it's one of the two, because it's typically would be a very bad fight for him unless he knows that you're in a rail Enyo, in which case he's trying to counter you by getting high DPS on you and getting up close and fast, and potentially he's dual prop, or potentially who knows. So the way you counter this and fight this, most people would say, well, it's just incompatible. You can't kite that ship, therefore you cannot win that fight. Not so. What I would do to make this happen is I would quickly change my keep at, and I would change my keep at to 100 kilometers. Sorry for the horrible mouse writing. So I would keep at 100 kilometers, and I would click his ship, then keep at 100. That basically means my ship's going to be moving away. At roughly 50 kilometers, let's put it right here. 50K is right there. I would hit my keep at 100 and turn on my micro warp drive. I would also start trying to lock him at, let's not do it that way. At 30, I would overload, or maybe even before, I would overload my micro warp drive, which would then send me up to about 3,800 or something meters a second. Now I'm going roughly the same speed as him. It's going to take a while for me to get up to that speed, so that ideally I'm shooting starting at about 30K. I'm shooting and putting my drone on him. But now, since we're both moving in the same direction, and the speed difference is only 200 meters a second, because of that, he's going to be closing much slower. That's our radial velocity. So because he's closing much slower, I'm going to have more time in my sweet spot range of between roughly 10 kilometers and 20 kilometers. So that's your sweet spot. That's where you want to keep your target, and you really never want to let them get past this 13 spot where you have your overloaded web ready to hit them with should they ever get to it. Now, let's say his tank is sufficient that he stays alive under your really nice DPS. You're doing 260 something DPS, I believe, from memory. So that's pretty decent DPS. And a Comet, he wants to get in and just win by doing tons of DPS to you up close and avoiding your gunfire. So what's going to happen is that you're going to keep him in this range for a few seconds more than typical. Had you approached or sat still or waited for him to hit 50 and then hit orbit, then he's going to get that scram on you much sooner. But this is going to delay it. This tactic is going to delay the time it takes him to get that scram and increase the time that he's in this sweet spot zone. And because of that, you're going to be able to do more DPS to him, because he's got a micro warp drive on, making him a huge target coming straight at you, removing all transversal. Therefore, you are hitting him perfectly. from 19 kilometers, depending on your skills. That's with my skills. 19 kilometers. You're hitting with fall off before that. At well, you could be hitting him doing some damage at 30 to 35 kilometers, but at 19 kilometers, you're doing your full DPS to him, 260 something, all the way until he gets to within your web range. Now, he's going to be closing at roughly 200 meters a second, but he's going to notice this at some point in the process, and he's going to overload a cycle, and that will shoot him in for the final scram. Your last hope, your last resort, is to get that 13k web on him and hope that he doesn't have his scram overloaded, primed to be overloaded, and he misses his scram. If that's the case, you could potentially back him all the way up off to 20k or so again before he has to re-accelerate and come back at you, again giving you several more seconds in the sweet spot zone to do heavy DPS to him. So I think I've described that tactic well enough. There's one last thing I wanted to describe to you about the tactics of this ship, and that's ammo. So typically I would carry two different types of ammo. I forgot to talk about this in the EFT video, the fitting video. I would carry my prime ammo, which I believe is Caldari Navy plutonium. That's my primary ammo that I use 95%, 99% of the time. But I would also carry, actually I would carry two others. I would carry Caldari Navy antimatter for the times when I was forced into a close-up fight that I didn't want, or perhaps I did want the close-up fight and I didn't care. Like, let's say there was an Incursus sitting at 0 in the site, you know, and he just wants to brawl face to face. Then in that case I would just do something like keep at 5k, right click him, keep at 5k, antimatter loaded, and just try to tear through him. With antimatter, your DPS is going to go up to well over 300, so you're going to absolutely shred stuff, especially if he tries to scram kite you, then please, it's over. So the antimatter is going to be ideal for tracking up close and doing high damage. But you also want to carry, I believe it's called Spike. And actually I've got EFT up still. Let's switch over to EFT. So you want to have Spike. And Spike is going to increase your range to 56 kilometers. So now, what is that going to help you? What situations are you going to be able to use Spike? Well, there's a couple very specific, particular, whatever, occasions when you're going to need the Spike. Those are when, for one, a ship is being cautious and he's staying at range, or perhaps you've already had a fight with him and now he's staying at range or running away from you and he's out at 50, 60 kilometers. What's your lock range? 50 kilometers. So, okay, he's out at 50k. Let's say he's out at 50k. So then there's not much you can do. So there are other ships in this game that can kite beyond 20k. Notably the Garmer. The Garmer, I have never flown one, so I'm not 100% familiar with it. But as far as I know, the Garmer can kite out to 30k pretty easily. He can fire missiles from 30 kilometers. There's also the Worm, which, God, please do not ever fight a worm. But if you have to, the Worm could potentially, with a faction point and links, sit out around 30k and let his drones do the work. Or he might just not even worry about a point and sit at 50k. And I fought, let's see, I don't forget what I was in. I think I was in a Svei pool. I fought a Worm with like faction, like a full rack of faction, drone damage, amplifiers, and he was basically in lock range and sensor boosters and stuff, and he was basically like a sniping worm of some type with nano. He was really fast and stayed at range, didn't point you, but just put a ton of drone DPS on you. So if you didn't warp off in time, you died, and oftentimes frigates are so low on hit points that something with high enough DPS doesn't even need a point to kill them. More so if the pilot's panicking. So I was able to kill him, but it was really tough. But in this case, you know, he's very weak. He doesn't have much tank. So if you can survive long enough, you're not pointed, so just a line, you can put some DPS pressure on him with Spike, and also with a Garmer. If you're in the Plex, and all of a sudden a Garmer comes in right as you're killing the targets you were fighting before, and now he's orbiting you and pointing you from 30k, you're probably going to die, but there's always the chance that potentially you could put sufficient DPS on him at 30 kilometers that you could force him off the field and make him run away. Your other way out would be to try to bounce by approaching and then turning and running away towards an aligned spot while spamming warp and overloading your micro warp drive. That way you could bounce him out of range. That's basically it for the tactics. I've covered pretty much all the things that you're going to need to know in most of your fights. The rest is going to come from the fight videos you watch, as well as from experience and practice. Keep in mind, it's not just faction warfare. There are times in nullsec PvP when this ship may be useful as well, like I said about the interceptors. Beyond that, it's a cool ship, it's a fun ship, but take the time to practice. Practice is very important for this ship. Hey guys, in this video you're going to see me gank a Cormorant. Not much more than that. So there is this Cormorant that I've scanned down to 15 degrees. Let me maximize the size. 15 degrees in a small site in Old Man Star. Old Man Star has historically been a very active, busy system, probably because of its proximity, its closeness to the Dixie. So I've just jumped in from Lattister and I uncloaked. I scan. I often do that. I'll actually scan down all the sites while I'm still cloaked so no one can see me from the jump in, and then I'll scan down which sites they're in and warp to them and try to just basically bum rush them before they know what's going on. In this case, this guy was actually not very experienced from what I could tell. He seemed like he was a newer player. He probably wasn't watching his directional scan. He may have never been killed in PvP before and didn't understand that that was a thing. So I come in, he's 30 off, he's fighting the rat in the site, it looks like. So you can see right here I use keep at, and like I said in the tactics video and I'm going to be repeating this a lot, and the fitting video, keep at basically is approach. I mean, like, here's the algorithm for it. Approach until you're at this range. Then, of course, you're going to overshoot and go to less than that range. Therefore, run away from until you're at this range, and then you're going to bounce beyond. You end up this strange kind of overshooting, slowly bouncing down until you get to the right range, which worked in this case. I nuked this guy really fast because I've got so much DPS. But in the end, might as well let it run. In the end, it's not nearly as safe as if you would hit orbit at 17 kilometers would probably be about ideal. And then if you saw tracking was a problem, which is not going to be a problem against a Cormorant in most cases, then in that case you would then use your keep at. But you don't want to start with keep at, because in too many cases it's going to result in you getting scrammed or webbed. Hey guys, in this video I'm going to talk to you about a fight I had and the mistake that I made throughout all of these fights you're going to see and using keep at instead of orbit. Keep at's going to track better than orbit, but the problem is when you initiate the keep at, it almost forces you into web or scram range. So in general, start out with an orbit, and then only if you're having trouble tracking do you go to a keep at, because it's just too dangerous to get yourself scrammed, and if you get scrammed and webbed, you die. Also, I wanted to show you how effective this ship was against the Slicer. So I am in Providence. It's usually a pretty good place to go to find fights, or at least it used to be. I haven't been there in several months, maybe more. But I jumped into this system. I just basically plotted a route through Providence. Maybe picked one system somewhere in Providence that had a a blip on the map that showed a lot of active pilots. Jumped in, and here I see an Imperial Navy slicer and a Kestrel. That's well within my Enyo's capability. So what I want to do is I want to keep at range 18. See, in this case, because I'm already relatively close to this guy, the keep at is less dangerous. When the times when the keep at is more dangerous is when you're charging in at each other. And we may not even see that happen in this fight. But I want to get keep at. Now this guy, he's not going to try to scram me at all. His ideal range, he's actually scared that I'll scram him. So, because he's a kite as well. So he's going to try to sit out there at 16, 17, 18K. It looks like he probably has his orbit set at about 16. I'm crushing him so hard right now, and it was unexpected that he didn't know whether to run or to jump through the gate. He didn't know what to do. I mean, expect to see that a lot with this Enyo. People, especially kites like the slicer, have just no clue what to expect. And then all of a sudden, that just crushing DPS comes out. But then in the process, a hawk has jumped in, and I probably could have done this better, but I didn't keep at range in time. He lands it wasn't even overloaded. He lands a web and a scram, and now I am in trouble. So I quickly switched. I messed up big time right there. I should have switched. I could have saved myself about a second or two had I switched that to antimatter faster. I need to switch to antimatter, get that DPS on him, as much DPS as possible. I should have had the web on him faster. That was a mistake. Like I've said before, if you record your fights, you will see yourself making mistakes, and no matter how much you do this, you're going to make mistakes still. It's good to be able to spot them and work on them. If you don't see them, you don't know they're there, and you can't ever improve. You will improve, but don't ever expect to be perfect. So now Condor comes in. At this point, the fight's looking really nice. I've moved this hawk out to a reasonable range to where I'm tracking him pretty good at about 5K. I've got the web on that's slowing him down quite a bit. The Condor's DPS is much less than the Hawk's. If I can just completely nuke this Hawk, then there's the potential that I could then quickly maybe 3 or 4 shot that Condor. However, like I was saying before, that 1 or 2 seconds it took me to switch ammos may have cost me this fight. Further, I'm pretty sure when I was out here in Providence, I was running with no implants. Had I had a 3% implant to my turret damage, plus the 1% to my hull hit points, and then the 1% surgical strike, that would make a total of 4% more damage output. I could have done much better in this fight. I probably would have killed this guy, but sorry, I keep pausing too much. I died when he was in structure. So it's a very close fight, and I'm wanting them to pod me because I have no implants. I basically assume most of the time, especially when you take something like an Enyo out to Providence, that there is a very high chance you're going to be podded. Therefore, don't go expensive on your pod, because in general, the way Providence works, if you go into Providence, is you jump in, you make intel. People ignore you, you get a kill. They say that you've killed them in intel, people start to care. So then they start forming up fleets, and intel constantly keeps reporting where you are. There's few places that are as good with intel as Providence, I've found. They all get together, they work together, and they absolutely, completely, they'll set up camps, insta-lock camps, bubbles, webs, sabers, etc., and they will try their damnedest to catch you. You can escape probably 60% of the time, 70%, but if you go PvPing for a long period of time in Providence, you're going to eventually get caught and you're going to get potted. But that doesn't matter. I don't really care, and you shouldn't care either, because you're out there to get some fun kills and some fun fights. Even if at the end of the night or day you get killed, who cares? I've killed a slicer. That was fun. I'm sure I killed more stuff than that before this. So it's all worthwhile in the end. You had fun. And it's a pretty steady place to go get fights. The only way to really be super safe somewhere like in Providence and really be a menace to them long term is to use scouts, like alts or our friends who are scouting for you, or to use ships that just pretty much can't be caught, like strategic cruisers, recons, and even more so interceptors. I've had a lot of fun with the Tyrannus in Providence. But that was the Enyo. I showed you how effective it was against the slicer. It just nukes slicers. I mean, that's like your ideal fight. A slicer thinks he can beat you, and you just crush him. In this video, we are going to see one of my better fights with the Rail Enyo. I was in Tama, which is usually a pretty violent system. It's a system where most of the time you can find a fight, not always. So you can see here I'm in the Rail Enyo. This is the standard fit, not the more capacitor-friendly version. And obviously there's lots of ships on scan. Many of them I absolutely cannot fight, but some of them I can. So I'm warping to this small outpost here. I wouldn't have warped to it unless I scanned it with directional down to 15 degrees. I'm pretty sure there's nothing here. No, there's a Kestrel and an Incursus. Okay. So I warped at 50 to just out of basic safety. If you're warping to a site that has people in it. See, we didn't see what was before the video started, so obviously I must have saw that these people were here. In general, it's best to go at range so that you can run away, or at least so that when you land you're not instantly scrammed and webbed, so that you can turn it into a running fight and kill anything that's as fast as you, hopefully. Gives you a good chance. So my first thing I need to do is decide whether or not I want to fight these two guys. And I'm just looking at them. You have to assume they're together, but then that guy puts out his drone, so now we're thinking maybe not. Okay, so he's just pointed him. The Incursus has engaged the Kestrel. So typically when you see something like this, maybe I would have a little bit of trouble killing both those ships by myself if they were together, but really I still probably do okay. Now that they're fighting each other, it's almost guaranteed that I'll be able to go in and win, because they're going to be working on each other, and I'll just go in and kill both of them. You can see they're trying to activate that gate, the guy who's pointed, and maybe the other guy too, as he saw me come in and got scared. So I'm engaging the Incursus because I figure that's the bigger threat, and I confirm that later on. I decide, once I have them both locked, I can definitely tell that the Incursus is winning this fight, so it's much better on my behalf to go after the guy that's winning rather than dunk the guy who's almost dead. That way I can maximize damage to both parties before I have to take on one of the guys by myself. You can see the whole time I flew this ship, I didn't manage capacitor very well. I'm a little bit closer to both of them than I would like. It's probably because I used the keep at, which I'm irritated that I used. The Incursus killed the Kestrel, and then I killed the Incursus about a second later. All good, no big deal. That was a pretty simple fight. Got my micro warp drive off, but wait, there's a Rifter. Okay, so a Rifter's just landed. I can kill a Rifter. Let's go. Hurry up, go, go, go. Wait, Mana Core 2. Okay, there's a Mana Core and a Rifter. I'm still probably okay. Let's dunk the Rifter first and then go after the Mana Core. So hurry up, avoid scrams, get a web on that Mana Core. Don't let him get a scram on me. Back off. I got to back off. I got too close because of my keep at. Luckily, he didn't have a scram. Rifter dies quickly. Then I need to get a point on that Mana Core. I accidentally hit it twice and cycled it off. Get DPS on him, re-get my point, get the point back on, get the point back on. Hurry up, hurry up. There you go. And Mana Cores usually go down pretty easy and pretty quick. And that, I believe, is all the fight. We'll let it run for a minute just to be sure. But basically what you had there was a string of really easy fights. The Kestrel's easy, the Incursus is easy so long as you kite. Incursus can be tough if he gets right on top of you. The Rifter, usually pretty easy, just keep him at range. There's very rarely he's going to be able to do anything to you. And the Mana Core is junk. If you see a Mana Core, then a lot of times, even when I'm in the middle of a blob and I'm having to run away or things are looking pretty scary, I'll still feel pretty confident killing a Manicore and just taking a second to blow up a stealth bomber of any sort, not just the Manicore. So all of them are very easy to kill, the stealth bombers. So a lot of times they're really nice targets to just kill really quick and get out. So if you have a lot of ships that you are potential options and you know you can't really fight all of them, but you might have a few seconds to get off a few shots, oftentimes you're going to come up against stealth bombers with very little to no tank, and they're very easy to kill. So in this case, the rest of the video shows me looting, which is not very entertaining. So they were pretty cheap fits. I killed, 3 ships there, didn't take any damage really at all, and overall it was a very easy fight. That's more the exception than the rule. Most of the time it's going to be a little bit more difficult than that. And again, we see that orbit would have been better than keep at, because that keep at always throws you too close to their ship and risks you getting scrammed, which is death for you. Hey guys, welcome to another Enyo video. In this video you're going to see me take on a wolf, and you're going to see some of the limitations to the Enyo as far as its capacitor goes. So what I've done is I've jumped into the system Renarelli, and I've scanned down a wolf to 15 degrees on a small site. So I'm going to warp to it. There's only 3 other people besides me in the system. Less chance of being blobbed that way. There's less people. Now there's just 2. I had 2 vectors on scan. Those aren't a threat. Once I get inside the site, they can't follow me, even if they were with the guy, whoever happens to be inside the site. So that's all good. So you can see I come in here and he is already 60k off the site. This is just like I tell you, it's an isolation technique. To avoid being blobbed, you can sit a good distance off the entrance to the site, and there's no way they can warp to you. So they have to come in and then burn to you, which gives him time to decide whether or not he wants to fight the ship, and also time, should it be bait, to kill the ship before any other ships can get in. So I set my keep at, and I engage. I was ready to hit the web. Like I've said over and over, I don't know what I was thinking by using keep at all the time instead of orbit. I think I should have used a combination of both, and in most of the cases, at least on the approach, I should have always used an orbit instead of a keep at, because the keep at bounces you too close in. I almost got within web range there. I got down to 14k, I think. But you can see his speed is nothing. I've got my micro warp drive on. I'm just sitting there burning up capacitor for no reason. That's a really big mistake on my part. I should have noticed his velocity was nothing, and I should have turned my micro warp drive off long ago, and then just watch the distance, watch the range. I'm overloading the guns a bit more than I probably should, but there's no one in system. I could probably safely just sit on top of this guy, save my capacitor, but I am just running that capacitor out. I finally understand that I don't need to be running the micro warp drive, and I turn it off, but it's not much help because I'm already under 50% on my capacitor, or 30% on my capacitor. Once you get under 30%, you lose whatever recharge you had. So now it's a fight to keep it running, because it's so close to 0 and it keeps running out. So I just ran out again right there. Lost point, and he warps away. So because I was so terrible about managing my capacitor in that fight, he was able to get away and survive what should have been a really easy kill on my part. I should have killed him super easy, but you see I'm asking if he had a stab. I didn't realize I messed up that bad, but that was just terrible on my part. So that's why I came up with the better capacitor version of the fit, because this fit against something that's more tanky like a wolf as compared to, or in contrast to, a slicer. A slicer you'll dunk in just a few seconds and it's not a problem for your capacitor, but for something like a wolf, it's got a buffer tank. The capacitor's more of a problem. And in this fight I could have flown differently to get the kill and succeed. But had he been charging me the entire time, I would have had to run that micro warp drive the whole time, and I would have ran out of capacitor, and he would have probably eventually got on top of me, and I may have lost. So it was a lot of mistakes on my part, but overall I think that either go with the capacitor fit if you think you're going to be fighting targets like this, or go with the Comet fit, which just as standard has much better capacitor than this setup that I'm using in this video.